What's common with this vehicle? Or this one here? Or this one right here? And a couple of vehicles from Acura, for example, like the MDX, all carry the same V6 engine. Yeah, it's a bunch of Hondas and Honda products that have seen a massive decline in reliability in the last few years. Now we want to talk about that because it's not restricted just to those vehicles which carry a specific V6 engine, which we need to talk about latest off the press. But let's just talk about Honda in general and the decline of their overall reliability. What we're looking at here is a Honda Civic, and everybody can appreciate a Honda Civic or a Honda Accord. Unassuming, reliable, unpretentious vehicles that everybody could responsibly buy and not worry about breaking the bank. They also didn't worry about reliability concerns until a few short years ago. Now, there's a few things we need to talk about where Honda has shifted the overall pattern of massive top reliability and have actually slid down the ranks. Did you know that Consumers Reports now have notched Honda down several more notches? They're actually down at the 15th slot of overall most reliable vehicles on the market today. 15! There was a time when they were number 1 or 2, and now they're down in 15th slot because of some key areas. So if people are asking the question, what do I buy for max reliability? I'd love to say Honda, but I mean Toyota, Lexus, Mazda now are up there, but definitely Honda has unfortunately lost some ground. Let's talk about some of those details.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
First of all, we're looking at the Honda Civic here. And a lot of this goes for a lot of their smaller cars, and that is the use of a different type of transmission in here. Now they've gone from the torque converter type transmission, which they've enjoyed for years and years and years, or manual gearboxes, which are literally bulletproof, to now with a lot of these vehicles on the smaller spaces, like these vehicles, like the Civics and the Accords, are now using what they call a CVT, a continuously variable transmission, which is essentially pulleys and belts, steel belts, that change in diameter as you rev them up, and there's programming to change the amount that picks up, but at the end of the day it works very much like a crude version of an ATV or an all-terrain vehicle type belt system. So what you have now is a bunch of pulleys and belts that rely on friction to actually grab while you're generating heat. Extra heat means extra maintenance. The oil gets dirty, the belt needs possible maintenance and tightening or replacement, and so it's not without its maintenance tasks. Why did they even go to a CVT transmission? Well, a lot of manufacturers elected that. Look at Nissan, unfortunately, have struggled for many years, clearly, with the deal using those CVT transmissions. They use a Jatco, they call it, not a very reliable piece, so that transmission has inherent issues. Nissan, Infiniti have struggled with that. Toyota does use CVTs, but usually when they're coupled up only to the electric drivetrain. So for example, in their hybrid motors, they use them there. So they're not utilizing there as much, other than maybe the Toyota Corolla. But however, the Toyota Camrys and the larger vehicles still often use torque converter transmissions. Now, Honda, on the other hand, are switching to CVTs in a lot of their models. And those belts they wear out, and lacking in maintenance usually means premature failure. That has been one area that has plagued Honda, specifically even more so in the Honda Accord realm, even more so than the Civics. So there's lots of caveats with Hondas, and in my opinion, a car like this is great. I personally suggest if you're going to buy a car like this, get yourself one with the manual gearbox if possible. Now, unfortunately, the Accord finally went bye-bye to the dodo bird and the manual gearbox sailed away, but the Civics, you can still get it in the two-door version or the hatchback version. The sedan is no longer available, it's CVT only, so you might be slightly limited there. But if you want maximum reliability, go with the manual gearbox and you can still enjoy a lot of the Honda reliability. And when we look here, Honda has a lot of different vehicles. The HR-V, we have the CR-V, which is essentially a small SUV. Then we have the Civic, like we see right here, classically reliable, and those are the smaller vehicles in their stable. Honda also has vehicles like the Pilot, as mentioned, and the Odyssey, the minivan. We can't forget about the Ridgeline, and a whole plethora of other vehicles that often step up and use V6 engines. But it's these smaller drivetrains that they're opting out. Remember, Honda used to have that 2.4 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. They were notoriously reliable. They didn't have turbos, there was no extra heat, you did your oil changes, you did your timing belts, and that thing would run almost forever. 400,000 miles easily if you just maintained it. So unfortunately, that 2.4 liter four banger now has been replaced with what they call a 1.5 liter turbo 4. Now that brings up the power, brings up the performance, but brings up the heat and the maintenance and lack of reliability. And the 1.5 liter turbo 4-cylinder engine definitely makes better performance, 200 horsepower. Couple that up with the right gearbox, it makes for a very sprightly and fun driving experience, but it's a smaller displacement that all lends to the CO emissions, and the fact that every manufacturer is going with smaller drivetrains and actually coupling that up with CVTs in many cases to reduce the amount of emissions that goes out to the atmosphere. And Honda's no different. Unfortunately, that 1.5 liter is subject to some serious issues. And this Honda Civic, like we're looking at right here, has those issues associated with it, because what you end up doing is you're putting too much fuel into the engine, but past the rings. So a vehicle like this, that fuel makes it past the piston and compression rings and winds up in the oil. So they call that oil fuel dilution. And what you have is essentially a layer of fuel. And fuel is nothing more than essentially like paint thinner. Think about that. Well, that can clean up oil in a hurry, right? If you're ever doing oil change, you use products like that that can clean up solvents, that can clean up oil. Well, unfortunately, throwing a bunch of gasoline in with the oil breaks that down, causes premature wear and tear on the engine, or the likelihood of it. And the reality is you've just got to really step up the required oil services, drop down the delayed intervals and essentially the miles that you would wait, and just do them much more frequently. But Honda didn't realize that allegedly at the time, and now we're finding that we're putting too much fuel in the oil, causing these oil and fuel dilution issues, leading to premature engine failure, or at least deterioration. Now, while I truly believe Hondas have high levels of reliability dialed in, there have been some sliding points. Recalls and the numbers and the severity of recalls often indicates draws a parallel to what the rest of the vehicle is going to be like. I mean, we know Ford has lots of recalls. Ford and the quality and the issues that you can find with Ford vehicles seem to be hand in hand. Well, Honda has a few recalls of their own. Did you know that there's over 100,000 CRVs that have a recall related to the batteries on the hybrid unit that, of course, can short out, causes excess heating, and there's a risk of fire. And now, unfortunately, the reliability crown slips even further out of Honda's hands with the engines that's tucked under these vehicles. Now, we spoke of these before. The 3.5 liter V6 that's in the Honda Passport, like we're looking at here, is one of those bread and butter, silky smooth, naturally aspirated workhorses that is designed and likely lasting hundreds of thousands of miles. But there have been some issues, and the new 3.5 liter V6 recall is there to point that out. Now, this vehicle here, the Passport here, allegedly Honda and NHTSA say there's about 250,000 vehicles recalled from Passports to Honda Ridgelines, the pickup trucks, Pilots, the Odysseys, and even some Acuras like the MDX, clearly because of some problems in the machining of the crankshaft of those particular V6 engines. So if you've got one of those vehicles impacted by this recall, or you're even shopping for a slightly used Honda, 2015 to 2019 model years are the years that you need to really be investigating, because those are the years where they're likely going to find some problems. Now, some of the problems mean it's going to be an inspection. Some of the problems could mean about 1% of the vehicles say they're going to see a major engine replacement or major overhaul just to fix the problem. Either way, they have to validate through serial numbers and check whether your vehicle or that vehicle in question has that issue with that V6 engine. Allegedly, Acura TLX vehicles from 2014 to 2020 are potentially impacted, and MDX vehicles from 2016 up to about March 2020 may also be on that list. Now, the Honda Pilot has dates anywhere from May to 2016 up to June 2016, so a small number there were impacted. And the Honda Odyssey has dates from April 2018 to August 2018. The Ridgeline pickup, which is their little pick-me-up truck, has dates from 2017 to 29, potentially inclusively. And of course, since the Honda Passport, like we're looking at right here, it does fit within that criteria. It has that 3.5 liter V6, would likely be subjected to this particular recall too. So it does represent a serious concern for any buyers or owners of these particular engines with the 3.5 liter V6s in the Honda brand. Now, sadly enough, Honda has struggled with a lot of reliability issues outside of this recent V6 recall or the 1.5 liter Turbo 4 or the CVT transmissions. There's been a deterioration and lower grade quality issue with component failures impacting slightly more fragile suspension components, as well as the front brakes have always been a little bit weaker on some of the Honda products. And I can can speak to that because I actually happen to own an older generation Honda Civic, and I find that the brakes are very, very fragile. They don't last very long, and even as a matter of fact, they tend to bind up, and they definitely need a little bit more lubrication, a little more attention, and attention to detail to fix that, because they just don't seem to be as robust as a lot of other manufacturers that I've personally experienced. As a DIYer, I can actually attest that Hondas have weak brakes. And so another big recall on Honda's bucket list this year, 2.5 million vehicles. Everything from 2017 to about 2020 Honda Civics. You get Accords, pretty much almost every vehicle that they have under their umbrella. As well, on top of it, there's a pile of Acuras, as Acura is the upscale version of Honda. Now, what we're talking about is the Denso fuel pump, and there's a distortion in the housing that could cause the impellers to hang up. If it does, it chokes out the fuel, and the fuel is essentially the deliverable. It brings fuel to the injectors and allows the engine to fire, ignite, and run. But without fuel delivery, the vehicle won't run. So you could actually find a vehicle's driving along and then it stalls because the fuel pump stalls out, jams up in the impellers, and no more fuel delivery. That could result in a failure, fault, stalling, or any other catastrophic issue. Now, to date, there hasn't been any significant problems related to that, but there's a significant number of vehicles impacted, 2.5 million. And there's a third recall that Honda's got under their bucket list. Actually, we opened the door on late model versions of the HR-V as well as the Honda Accord, specifically the sedan. Allegedly, there's about 300 vehicles or 300,000 vehicles that have a problem with the pretensioners. Yeah, seatbelt here. Like we're looking at here, this is strictly in the event of the impact, there is a tensioning. The seatbelt's supposed to grab and jam like that. But there is a fault with the way it was manufactured, and so it does pose a risk for somebody in the event of an actual collision. And yet there's another recall, and it impacts one of their tried and true engines and one of their most reliable workhorse vehicles like this, the Honda Pilot, and any other vehicle, mainly with the 3.5 liter V6, which is historically known as one of their go-to workhorse engines, and generally they are reliable. But there's a recall for a significant amount of vehicles that could be impacted by a manufacturing issue with the crankshaft that could cause premature rod bearing failure and catastrophic engine catastrophes. Yeah, unfortunately, there are many vehicles. Check it out. There's a variety of different Hondas as well as Acuras that could be impacted by that 3.5 liter V6 issue. Check it out. So it's hard to believe with all of these manufacturers today's day and age that Honda has literally slipped down to number 15 slot. I mean, I still hold a personal amount of faith with Hondas. They make great engines. F1 teams, of course, even their small engines for their garden equipment are very robust, and a lot of their vehicles are still great to go. But unfortunately, they have seen some major challenges in the automotive sector in the last few years, and because of that 1.5 and oil and fuel dilution, because of some of these recalls on the engine problems and fragility in certain areas and the tinniness of some of their entry-level vehicles, it does tell me that I may have to actually look slightly somewhere else, because it makes me a little nervous for the overall reliability that you're finding in modern day Hondas. As a matter of fact, I would put more faith in a modern day Toyota by a long shot than you're finding in most Hondas. Now, with that said, Honda's always got great reputations. They come from the same culture as Toyota. They put strong support and attention to detail, as well as the pride of construction, to ensure that they're building vehicles as best as they possibly can. So I truly have faith that Honda will pull themselves out of this rut. But unfortunately for now, there are some challenges. Right there, check out that video. That's all about where Toyota reliability has gone in the last few years. Hope to see each and every one of you in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.